This morning I read Letter to America, which is Osama bin Laden's letter to America explaining why he attacked Americans. And yeah, so go read it.
But where will Hamas be?
Hamas is not going to be finished. If Israel thinks that they're going to finish Hamas, I think that's a miscalculation on their side. It's not going to happen.
And as Palestine struggles for national existence, the conflict catches the inevitable innocent in its toil. Meanwhile, at Lake Success, the United Nations wrestles with the problem. Here, Sir Alexander Cadogan states Britain's unchanging stand on the mandate. Palestine's case is before the World Parliament as Arab delegates look on stonily.
So I just read a letter to America, and I will never look at life the same. I will never look at this country the same. I will never.
Hey everybody, it's Everett with Ohio for Freedom. I have really good timing. It's a Saturday night. Everybody is hanging around on Saturday night waiting for me to come on live. Not really true. I'm saying that sarcastically. The title of this episode is No Such Thing as Palestine. No such thing as Palestinian people. I'm adding to the title. If I'm going to say that, maybe I would want to quote one of the original members of the Palestine Liberation Organization. So let's do that. Zahir Musin said in an interview with Dutch newspaper Trouw on March 31st, happens to be my birthday, 1977, he said, and I quote, "The Palestinian people does not exist." This is the head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization at that time. Palestinian people does not exist. The creation of a Palestinian state is only a means for continuing our struggle against the state of Israel, for our Arab unity. In reality, today, there is no difference between Jordanians, Palestinians, Syrians, and Lebanese. Only for political and tactical reasons do we speak today about the existence of a Palestinian people. All right, it's going to be a little bit of work and a lot of stuff to go through to unpack that. So let's get started.
I hear the sweet sound of freedom, and I won't be long.
I really am going to ask you to like, share, subscribe, smash the like button, leave a comment, call your grandma, teach your grandpa how to use the internet. I really want your help to get this out. Listen, I want to state this. I'm going to justify that quote that there's no such thing as a Palestinian state or a Palestinian people. I want to say this. There are people today that we refer to as Palestinians. And in the war between Hamas and Israel, we have compassion for all innocent civilians. And the devastating demonic attack that was perpetrated, that some of the people that we're going to talk about deny even happened, well, it did happen on October 7th. And in the opinion of this broadcast, which would be me, the response by Israel is justified. I happen to believe that it is the intent, and it has been actually carried out, that Israel is using as much caution in the response to the October 7th attack. But Israel has no choice. Hamas has to be eradicated. Unfortunately, Hamas uses civilians as targets, as human shields, because the whole Palestinian movement has no regard for everyday citizens. And yes, innocent civilians have been killed, and it's not over yet, and that more of that will happen. Will there be some excesses? Will there be mistakes? Yes. Amongst the Israeli ranks, is there likely to be some overzealous or people that have kind of a less than holy attitude? Probably so. That's the nature of humanity. Nonetheless, the objective of Israel to completely eradicate Hamas is not only justified, they have no other choice. So we have compassion for everyone. But what we're dealing with tonight is the fact that there is no such thing as a Palestinian people. Palestine has never been a country. Who's the president of Palestine? What's the Constitution of Palestine? What is the Palestinian language? Ain't none. What is the Palestinian culture? There's no distinct Palestinian culture. It is an invention. And we have been lied to for decades. Now, that might not make me popular. I'm not here to be popular. And so I'm going to, it's not plagiarism if you use or cite other sources and give credit to it. And so I'm going to do that. After doing a lot of research, running a lot of references, I was fortunate to stumble upon the work of at the end of the slideshow that I'm going to do here in just a minute, I will reread his name and probably correct, but I'm calling his name Rafir Ronan. But he put a nice little slideshow together. I'm just going to go through it. However, we've got all the references that are cited in that slideshow. And so I'm just going to begin, and I think it'll be quite informative. So here we go. It's entitled, How We Swallowed the Bluff. And if you're listening, you wouldn't be able to see, and maybe if you can see, it's really tiny, but the opening, piece of artwork there is, it looks like Yasser Arafat, but certainly a PLO member leading what is probably an Israeli prime minister, leading him by the nose, and the fabrication of the Palestinian people as a maneuver in psychological warfare. And folks, let me say this unequivocally. We're going to justify that saying right there. And the author of this slide presentation passed away, I believe, in 2008 at the age of 53. That was very, very tragic. But there's a reference to the Annapolis conference that obviously took place here in the United States. That's a picture of George Bush and one of the Israeli officials and a Palestinian official, where President Bush was speaking about his vision regarding the virtues of 2 states for 2 people. Boy, I'd like to comment on that, but I'm just going to keep going. And how could anybody oppose such a marvelous idea? But actually, the real question is whether we are talking about 2 peoples. Let's check it out. One of those peoples, the Jewish people, has a clear identity, an identity they've kept for 2,000 years in the diaspora, remembering their one and only homeland, the biblical land of Israel. And actually goes back farther than 2,000 years, doesn't it? But who is the second people? Is it really a people without a home? There seems to be this notion, or it tries to be posited to the world at large, and especially in America right now, that there was the Palestinian people with their Palestinian culture, and they occupied their land, and those mean old Israelis came out and removed them from the land. But that is a complete and total myth, and we're going to show you why. All right, so in March, pardon me, I coughed, on March 31st, once again, that's my birthday. It's a great day. One thing about my birthday is that it kind of ends the first quarter, for whatever that's worth. And March 31st, 1977, the Dutch newspaper Trouw published an interview with a Palestinian leader of the Syria-controlled, as I won't be able to pronounce that, faction of the Palestine Liberation Organization. So this is a Palestinian leader with the PLO, and this is a direct quote from what he said. And I said this earlier, but it bears repeating, because this is a Palestinian Liberation Organization leader saying this. And he's saying the Palestinian people does not exist. The creation of a Palestinian state is only a means for continuing our struggle against the state of Israel for our Arab unity. In other words, this is completely a lark. It is completely a propaganda campaign. I might venture off and make a comment here until, I am from Tennessee. I am Southern by heritage, although I grew up most of my life in Ohio. But I go down south, I speak Southern. I pick up my old accent. I actually know a lot about the South. I could blend into any Southern state, and anybody that encountered me after I was down there for a little bit would just naturally assume that I had been in that area perhaps all my life. But as a former Tennessean, I'm not going to portray myself as somebody from Alabama or somebody from Arkansas or somebody from Georgia because I'm from Tennessee. And so it was worth me taking the time to say that. Only for political and tactical reasons do we speak today about the existence of a Palestinian people, since Arab national interests demand that we posit the existence of a distinct Palestinian people to oppose Zionism. For tactical reasons, Jordan, which is a sovereign state with defined borders, cannot make claims to Haifa and Jaffa, while as a Palestinian, the ruse, you see, I can undoubtedly demand Haifa, Jaffa, Beersheba, and Jerusalem. However, and this is important, folks, this is a quote from a Palestinian Liberation Organization leader. However, the moment we reclaim our right to all of Palestine, we will not wait even a minute to unite Palestine and Jordan. Now, I'm going to go back and I'm going to I just want to do this at the outset. I'm going to do a program in the future where we go through all the scripture that will help a Christian understand the role of Israel today and the role of the Israeli people today. I'm not going to do that, try to be exhaustive about that today, but I wanted to just read this scripture from Jeremiah 31, verses 35 to 37. Thus says the Lord, who gives the sun for light by day, who sets in order the moon and stars for light by night, who stirs up the sea so that its waves roar. The Lord of hosts is his name. So in that verse, the Lord is just establishing or reminding his creation that he's the creator, that he governs the universe, that he put all the laws of the world, the planets, the stars, the universe in motion. And he says, only if this fixed order departed from my presence, declares the Lord, would Israel's descendants ever cease to be a nation before me. And then he even reiterates, this is what the Lord says, only if the heavens above could be measured and the foundations of the earth below searched out, would I reject all of Israel's descendants because of all they have done. And so, yes, there are scriptures in Romans 11 and Galatians 3. Spiritual Israel includes everybody that has accepted the Messiah, Jesus, as Lord and Savior. That has never changed from the Jesus was speaking to Jews when he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. That is the message to the Jew then. It's the message to the Jew now. Acts chapter 2, the very first sermon in the New Testament given by the Apostle Peter, he was speaking to a Jewish audience, telling them to repent. That hasn't changed. Nonetheless, God has said, unless the laws of the universe cease to be, I will never forget the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so I said this to a friend of mine earlier today, and I say it like asking a question. And I'm talking on a Christian level right now. Do you have members of your family that are not saved? Do you have members of your family that are not in the family of God? They've not accepted the Messiah. They've not accepted Jesus. Probably so. Are they still your family? Oh, yes, they are. And so there is a people today, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that are in the family in that sense. And that covenant covers that group of people, and it covers the land. And it's always going to be, and yes, there's a hardness in large part on the hearts. I'm getting further than I want to get, but there's a covenant with God's people, the Israelites, and there is a covenant that involves the land. And for everybody, Jew, Gentile, Mohammedan, Hinduan, everyone, if you want to have a relationship with the Father, it's through the Lord Jesus Christ. I am going to get back to, I'm going to just go all the way through this slide presentation. So 3 years earlier, in 1974, the late Syrian president Hafez al-Assad declared, "It would be fitting for us to mention to the responsible Israeli authorities that we view Palestine not just as an inseparable part of the Arab nation, but also a part of southern Syria." So you have these leaders that are saying Palestine isn't really Palestine. This guy is saying it's actually part of Syria. And then you have that other fellow that we mentioned saying it's part of Jordan. And as soon as we wipe Israel off the map, everybody's going to unite. In 1977, this Hafez al-Assad said, "A state named Palestine has never existed." Jordan's King Hussein responded, "The appearance of the national Palestine persona serves as a response to Israel's claim that Palestine is Jewish." In 1993, in an interview to an Egyptian paper, Hafez al-Assad restated his stance: "When I speak of Palestine, I see it as part of Syria." Yet the prize goes to Yasser Arafat, who in 1970 said, with candid simplicity, "The question of borders does not interest us. From the Arab standpoint, we mustn't talk about borders. Palestine is nothing but a drop in an enormous ocean. Our nation is the Arabic nation that stretches from the Atlantic Ocean to the Red Sea and beyond it. Our nation is the Arabic nation that stretches from the Atlantic Ocean to the Red Sea and beyond it." And if that wasn't enough, in a moment of perhaps carelessness, he revealed the truth to the Italian journalist Oriana Fallaci that the PLO, this is a quote, "the PLO is fighting Israel in the name of pan-Arabism," adding, "What you call Transjordan is nothing more than Palestine." I think I'll take a departure right here. I'm juggling a few things, but it all fits. So on the screen now, I am displaying a picture. I call him the original coward, but he was just the original coward that brought a lot of things to our attention. But that's Osama bin Laden. And probably this week you have seen the twits on TikTok saying, "Oh, I just read Osama bin Laden's letter." And like, oh my gosh, it's like so Osama me and so bin Laden. It's just like, oh, dude. All right. So I went and found Osama bin Laden's letter to America. I'm going to just look at a couple of parts of that. But I also found this on Wikipedia. It's interesting. Osama bin Laden was born on the 10th of March in 1957 in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. So let me just ask, wouldn't that make him Saudi Arabian? I mean, I would think so. I'm Tennessean because I was born in Tennessee. He was born in Saudi Arabia. So wouldn't that make him Saudi Arabian? His father, Mohammed bin Awad bin Laden, was a billionaire. So Osama bin Laden, Saudi Arabian Osama bin Laden, was the son of a billionaire. I think he was pretty well off. So this is from the very first page of this 4-page letter to America. "In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful." Yeah, the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, the one that you killed 3,000 innocent Americans in the name of because of all that compassion and all that mercy of your false God. But I'll look down at there about your former president warned you previously about the devastating Jewish control of capital and about a day that would come when it would enslave you. So wait a second. All this stuff that we've always believed about, it's so confusing. We have been in a psychological propaganda warfare. So we went into Iraq because, we went into Iraq because we needed to, because there were weapons of mass destruction that weren't there. And we went into Afghanistan, But the whole time was anybody ever really talking about the fact that at least in Osama bin Laden's mind, it was all about the Jews. And then I'm just going down to the very last, it's 4 pages. Palestine has been under occupation for decades, and none of your presidents talked about it until after September 11th, when Bush realized that your oppression and the tyranny against us were part of the reason for the attack. Then he talked about the necessity for 2 states. Now I want to unpack this just a little bit. So this is Osama bin Laden, who is Saudi Arabian, but in the letter to America that justifies his killing 3,000 innocent Americans in the name of his merciful false god, Allah, he's talking about Palestine. Palestine has been under occupation for decades, and none of your presidents talked about it until September 11th, when Bush realized your oppression and the tyranny against us were part of the reason. Wait a minute. Osama, I thought you were Saudi Arabian, but you're talking about Palestine and saying tyranny against us. Well, see, folks, that's exactly the whole proposition. Because and I'm sorry if people don't want to hear this, Islam is not a religion of peace. It's not. And lying Mohammedans will lie if it serves their purpose, and it's right out of the Quran. I was just reading in it today. And so but the greater point is, you have Osama bin Laden talking about Palestine. It's just like me being from Tennessee, and I don't like what's happening in South Carolina. And so somebody's being oppressed in South Carolina, and I say, they're oppressing us because I'm a Southerner. No, I'm a Tennessean, and what's happening in South Carolina is affecting somebody in South Carolina, in my hypothetical exercise of language here. But this is what you're dealing with, folks, when you hear people talk about the oppression of the Palestinian people. There aren't Palestinian people. There isn't a Palestinian culture, and there's never been a land that the Arab world called Palestine until just a few decades ago. It is a ruse. It is it's an attempt to bluff the rest of the world. So let me finish this up. It is a sin to kill a person this is Osama talking here. A sin to kill a person without proper justifiable cause, but terminating the killer is a right. Okay. You should be aware that justice is the strongest army in security. It offers the best livelihood. You lost it by your own making when you supported the Israelis in occupying, here it is again, our land and killing our brothers in Palestine. So folks, I hope I'm trying to make this clear. Bin Laden was not from what people are calling Palestine, but still he calls it ours. He's a Saudi Arabian, but that is just the point. It's a and you heard the words of Yasser Arafat. It is a pan-Arab propaganda campaign. And these lying Mohammedans are such deceitful liars as they serve their false prophet and their false god, because what did he say? It is a sin to kill a person without proper justifiable cause, but terminating his killer is a right. The only problem, you deceased, now lying Mohammedan, false god serving Osama bin Laden, is the 3,000 innocents that you participated in the murder of on September 11th. They hadn't killed anybody. But it shouldn't be surprising to read this kind of language, because that is what lying Mohammedans do in the service of their false god, Allah. And I'm tired of people falling for that. So I'm going to get back to the original slideshow. And we'll just keep going here. It becomes evident that Arafat's nation, the leader of the stateless, already stretches across a territory larger than the entire continent of Europe. So I'm just kind of going string of consciousness, folks. We're going to go back a little bit more than 100 years. Okay, then we'll come back to this slide. At the end of World War I, believe it or not, despite appearances to the contrary, I wasn't around then. I have to read about it. But at the end of World War I, that was the demise, the complete destruction of the Ottoman Empire, the Arabic Muslim Ottoman Empire. And we'll see this on a map in a little bit, but if you can just think of the whole very top of the continent of Africa, that's what it was. Some interesting facts about that. It was a no man's land. Done a little bit of research. The average literacy rate across the Ottoman Empire at that time was varied somewhere between about 5 and 14%. Very illiterate, very, very backward. But that whole stretch of land, we'll show this on a map in a little bit, it fell. The Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Turks, it was over. So what happened? The forces that won, that would have been the US, that would have been France, that would have been Britain, had to carve up that nomadic territory and create nation states. You see my phone right here? If you have an iPhone, ask your iPhone, when did modern day Iraq come into existence? It'll say 1922. It'll say the same thing about Jordan. It'll say the same thing about Syria also, I believe. So at that time, the winners of World War I had to deal with this vast expanse of land. What are they going to do? And so those areas became protectorates. Now, this was a lot closer in history to the time of colonialism, but the stretch of land in which Israel now resides, the British called Palestine. It wasn't a country. It was a region that included what is now Jordan, what is now Israel, and a lot more. And the League of Nations agreed, it was 1922, agreed that a homeland for the Jewish people would be created, and they gave them a lot of land. I'm gonna get back to my slide here. Let's get back to my slide. I think I'm gonna get back to my slide. There we go. So let's just keep going. I'm kind of toggling here just a little bit. There is, we've quoted a couple of different PLO leaders. All right. Here's another one. There's nothing like the testimony of one of PLO's founders and its first chairman, Ahmad Shakiri. As early as 1956, he proclaimed over the UN podium as the Arab League's ambassador, such a creature of Palestine does not exist at all. And he would go on to be the first head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Such a creature as Palestine does not exist at all. This land is nothing but the southern part of greater Syria. And he goes on to say that Palestine does not. So if he says Palestine does not exist at all, then by logical extension, Palestinians do not exist. The same Shakiri was appointed the first chairman of the PLO when that organization was created by a summit of Arab leaders in 1964 in Cairo as an organization dedicated to the, quote, liberation of a country that, in his own words, didn't even exist. I'm just gonna pause right there. What's this fellow's name again? His name is Ahmad Shakiri. Now we're going to learn a little bit more about him, but he was the original head of the PLO, and before he became head of the PLO, he actually stated that Palestine didn't exist. And as the author points out, if Palestine didn't exist, the Palestinian people couldn't exist. But there's a lot more about this fellow that we want to go through that's pretty interesting. Because all right, I'll stay with this train of thought. 8 years before the beginning of the bluff, Ahmad Shakuri said that Palestine is Syria. Now get this, afterwards he served as the first chairman, and Arafat, who succeeded him, stated that Palestine is also Jordan. In the same occasion, he accidentally revealed that he fights Israel in the name of Pan-Arabism. Can I just cut to the chase for a second, folks? The whole Muslim world hates Israel, period. And as soon as they get done hating and killing Israel, they hate the West, they hate the U.S. So the whole Muslim world hates Israel, hates the United States, hates the Jews, and hates Christians. When spokesmen of the terrorist organization remove their camouflage colors for a brief second, it becomes evident that the PLO does not fight in the name of the so-called plundered and deprived people, but in the name of 22 gigantic states, bigger, this is the whole top of Africa, bigger than the entire European continent. The PLO, as the representative of the Palestinian people, is no more than a front organization for those states. Now, in their arrogance, Zuhair, Moshin, Arafat, and Shakiri revealed the whole strategy, declaring that the Arabs who live in Israel are precisely the same Arabs who live in Syria, Jordan, or Lebanon. They are not a separate people, but a fragment of the enormous Arab nation dividing among many Arab countries. They do not have a separate identity. In their identity, they are Arabs, and the invention of Palestine is just a transparent bluff, a new instrument in the continuing war against the state of Israel for the sake of, quote, Arab unity. Now, Ahmad Shakiri was born in Lebanon to a Turkish mother. He was a lawyer in Jordan. He served at, get this now, he served as Syria's ambassador to the UN. Now, he's born in Lebanon. His mother is Turkish. He's a lawyer in Jordan, but he served as Syria's ambassador to the UN. Now, how can you do that? You know, I saw something recently. Arnold Schwarzenegger was able to have a very successful bodybuilding career, followed by a successful acting career. And then he became governor of California. And in the interview, he was asked, does it bother you that you can't become president of the United States? And he said, not really, because America's been good to me, but I'd be a good president. I don't think Arnold Schwarzenegger would be a good president. But yet, Arnold Schwarzenegger, when he immigrated to America, he basically became an American. Okay, he basically became an American. What's the relevance of what we're talking about here? But Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't serve as governor of California and then try to be ambassador to the UN from his original country, which I think was Austria or Germany. He didn't try to, serve as the European or the United Nations ambassador to Belgium or something like that. But look at this guy. The first head of the PLO was born in Lebanon. His mother was Turkish. He was a lawyer in Jordan. He served as Syria's ambassador to the UN, as Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the UN, the Arab League's ambassador to the UN. He did all of these things. He's a multinational man. On the one hand, as early as 1956, he's saying over the UN podium, as the Arab League's ambassador, such a creature as Palestine does not exist at all. But after several years, the fraud is created. Now, so ask yourself, I'm getting, it's too many. I'm losing track. I got to read it. So this guy's born of a Turkish mother in Lebanon. He's a lawyer in Jordan. He's ambassador to the UN for Syria. He's ambassador to the UN for Saudi Arabia. And then he becomes the first head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization for a supposed country that he had earlier stated doesn't even exist. Now, how does that happen? Because he's Arabic. It's just an Arabic Muslim ploy. The whole nation of a Palestinian people is just a small group of disgruntled Arabics and Muslims that the greater Arabic nation group is using as pawns in their ongoing attempt to destroy the nation of Israel. My goodness, I think I even said that pretty good. Therefore, remove from the argument the web of lies, the deception, the fraud, and the myth, and you reveal the original proportions of a conflict between an Arab Muslim empire stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the Chinese border and the Jewish people, claiming their rights to their one and only historic homeland, consisting of less than 1/5 of 1% of the lands under Arab control. So, at the conclusion of World War II, folks, this notion that after the Holocaust, all the Jews from all over the world went to Israel and that there weren't any Jews there in Israel before, that's just not true. There have always been Jews in the land of Israel. Yes, after the Romans all but annihilated the Jewish people and drove them out, there has always been a remnant. And during at the conclusion of World War I, there were lots of Jews in their homeland, just as there were lots of Arabs all over that world, but there were no nation states. There wasn't any Iraq. There wasn't any Syria, not recognized by any international standing or boundaries. There wasn't Iraq. There wasn't Syria. There wasn't Jordan. There wasn't Qatar, certainly, and all these other nations. And so that area that was to eventually become Israel, folks, it was recognized by the League of Nations and international law. And then when the League of Nations, and of course you had a little interruption there called World War II, when that had to give way to the United Nations, and I'm not a fan of the United Nations, don't misunderstand me, but the United Nations adopted what the League of Nations had said about Palestine, which was a term that encompassed the whole area, not all of the Muslim world, but all of the part that includes what is now Jordan and Israel and part of Syria and so forth. But my point is, don't get lost because I'm not the greatest presenter. What the League of Nations agreed to, and it was in international law in 1922, the United Nations affirmed in 47 and 48, and it's never changed. And so if Israel doesn't have a right to exist, according to international law, Iraq doesn't have a right to exist. And Jordan doesn't have a right to exist. And I'm not a Middle East expert, but I know a whole lot more than I have recently. And so when Israel was recognized in 1947, the greater pan-Arab collection of Arabic nations, they didn't like it one bit. They did not like it one bit. So what did they do? They created the fake, false notion of a nation called Palestine. There is not now a nation called Palestine. There never has been a nation called Palestine. There isn't a Palestinian culture. There isn't a Palestinian people. There isn't a Palestinian way of life. It's just a small group of Arabs that are virtually identical to Arabs in all those other countries that we mentioned, except for one thing. They are all pawns in the hands of the propagandists. Man, I don't know if I'm covering everything I wanted to cover, but I'm trying to cover it. So in today's world, I should get a participation award. So let's just keep going. Until the Six-Day War, the Arabs didn't even try to camouflage their intention. They would use phrases like final solution, and the slogans that are frequently announced over the radio waves in all Arab countries were plain spoken and primitive. They would say things like, throw the Jews into the sea, the men to the sea, and the women for us, because the Mohammedans will gladly, as we learned on October 7th, the Mohammedans, those that serve the false god Allah, are more than happy to take captive women and rape them after they've killed the men. And then they'll very often kill the women after that. And the world knew and kept silent, but nevertheless had difficulty digesting a style so blatant and murderous. Following their defeat in the Six-Day War, the Arab countries understood that Israel would be impossible to beat militarily. They understood that the Israel Samson would be possible to beat only if they had a cunning, oh my goodness, Philistine Delilah. By the way, did you know that the term Palestine comes from a derogatory renaming of the area by the Romans that desecrated the Jewish people in Hadrian's day? They wanted to erase the name of the Israeli people, the Jewish people. And so instead of calling Israel Israel, they renamed it after the Philistines, and that's where Palestine comes from. No longer would there be primitive cries inflaming the masses to genocide, but rather sophistication, a melody carefully tuned for the refined Western ear. And see, this guy so nails it. A melody carefully tuned for the refined Western ear. And you have to admit, they've been very good at counting on the laziness of the West and the American people. We just don't know. We're kind of doing our thing. And so the Mohammedans lie to us, and we just go along with it. We just go along with it. But let me keep going here. To justify the demand for the enormous Arab empire for an addition of territory from a tiny country fighting for its life. This is how the fiction of the Palestinian people was invented. So was born the worldwide propaganda campaign that turned matters on their head. The Israeli David against the Arab Goliath was transformed by way of sophisticated propaganda into the Israeli Goliath. So they did a flip-flop, oppressing the Palestinian David. The object of this propaganda is to blot out the name and identity of the ancient biblical land of Israel and to transform it into the land of the Palestinian people, fabricated by Arab propaganda. The Palestinian fabrication is a most monumental fraud with no precedent in the history of nations. The successful bluff gained such a strong foothold in the media and the bastions of liberalism that no one doubts its authenticity. Satisfying the demands of the Palestinian lie would put an end to the identity of the land of Israel. Following this loss of land's identity will come the loss of our right, he's speaking as an Israeli, to the land. For if there are, quote, Palestinians, this implies that there is also a land called Palestine. And if there is a Palestine, there is no Israel. Folks, that's exactly what it's about. So by means of brainwashing, fabrication, lies, falsification, and taking advantage of the world's ignorance and the international media's anti-Semitism and superficiality, a process of falsifying and erasing history has been taking place in broad daylight for several dozen years already. And just like Goebbels, Hitler, Stalin, the arch propagandists of the 20th century said derisively, the bigger the lie, the more the people will believe it. This lie can only be refuted by one true affirmation: this land is our land, the land of the Jews. As much as all security and rationale are true and substantial, they cannot collapse to Arab demand. This is him speaking to his people, and I happen to agree with him. We thought that maybe, and now he's chiding his own people a little bit. The Israelis and the Jews thought that maybe it'd be worthwhile that they be clever, quote unquote, and not justified, that they give up what is ours and that we try to appease the Arabs and go with their bluff so that they will let us live our lives. But it simply doesn't work. We tried it. All right, I'm going to let that sit right there. So I'm gonna try to bring this in for a bit of a landing. But I hope you begin to understand that Palestine was a term that the British used to describe, it's what they called an entire region, not a country, an entire region that was part of a broader, much broader region that the victors of World War I had to carve out boundaries for people groups. That's how Iraq came into being. That's how Jordan came into being. That's how Lebanon came into being, a lot of other countries, and it's also how Israel came into being. However, out of all of those countries that I just mentioned, and no, I'm not an expert, there was one people group that has 3,000 years of recorded Bible history that is their land. And you know what? It wasn't good enough for them. It wasn't good enough for them. And so it was delayed in 1922. And then shortly you're almost in the throes of World War I. It was delayed. And so there was the British, it's called the Palestine Mandate. The British had like protectorate control. It was never meant to be a long-term thing. But after the conclusion of the Second World War, Israel was given his land, except they only got a very, 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 did I say very enough? Very small portion of what is still recognized in that original 1922 League of Nations mandate resolution, whatever you call it. In other words, Israel has given up so much, but in the pan-Arab mindset, it's not enough. Dennis Miller said this. Said the pan-Arab world, Muslim world that was in existence after the complete collapse of the Ottoman Empire, think of it as a football field, and it's all Muslim, it's all Arab. And in the middle of the football field, there's a matchbox. And that matchbox, we just heard it, less than 0.5%, okay? Maybe smaller than that. But out of that matchbox, that's Israel. And the Arab world is saying to Israel, give us half the matchbox and maybe we'll be happy. The idea of a Palestinian state is a creation. I've got one clip that I want to play. I've found this interesting. Now, let me get back over to here. And I wanted to, okay. So I just wanted to, the first head of the PLO, Ahmad Shakuri, again, was born to a Turkish mother, educated, and it gets too confusing, but he was ambassador to the UN for Syria and for Saudi Arabia, and I think one other country, but he was the first head of the PLO and PLO to plead for a nation that he had previously said didn't even exist. Why? Because the common thread is it's all pan-Arab, it's all Muslim. They're lying to us because that's what Mohammedans do. Okay. And so I'm justifying that. Now, oh my goodness, do I want to, this is David, I'm going to quote an article from David Horowitz because I want to get this all off my chest. It's incontrovertibly clear from a legal and historical standpoint that Israel has just as much of a right to exist in its so-called borders, post-1967 borders, as it does in its pre-1967 borders. It also patently obvious that from a geographical, moral, and security standpoint, that anyone advocating a two-state solution is implicitly denying Israel's right to exist in any capacity. I happen to agree with David Horowitz. It's time to get the facts straight. There already is an Arab Palestinian state, Jordan. And maybe that's why they wouldn't take any refugees. But the two-state solution was carved out in 1922. in the last legally recognized agreement delineating boundaries of nation states. Arabs got 77% of the mandate for Palestine, which was all the land east of the Jordan River, while Jews got the land to the west of the river. History doesn't lie. All right. I want to read this. This is from the Jerusalem Post. As the war ended, the victorious Western power, and some of this I'm just reiterating, decided the former territories of the Ottoman Empire, chiefly Palestine, Transjordan, Syria, and Lebanon, were to be placed under European receivership. Why? Because the Ottoman Empire had fallen. It was placed under European receivership. The British mandate for Palestine, put under the mandatory powers of Great Britain, Palestine, and that, again, that's a region, not what they're, because right now, Palestine, what they're calling is Gaza, and then completely disconnected the West Bank. Let me cut to the chase. The British mandate for Palestine, put under the mandatory powers of Great Britain, Palestine, Transjordan, known today as Israel, Jordan, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. Temporary in nature, the mandate was designed to be a preparatory step toward the establishment of independent states, among them a national home for the Jewish people. Now, I want to try to bring this in for a landing. I believe I got to go over here. I want to introduce one more character to you. This is Mohammed Shtaya. And this was, if you want to see how messed up and how lied to we've been, follow me for just a moment here. This is the, quote, Palestinian prime minister who has been the prime minister of what is supposedly Palestine since 2009. And this is from Al Jazeera, folks. While Gaza is governed by Hamas, the occupied West Bank is governed by the Palestinian Authority led by Fatah. Now, let me keep going. This might get confusing because most of us don't dig into this all the time. So I looked up Mohammed Ibrahim Shtaya, who is the, quote, prime minister of, quote, Palestine. And he's been in that role since 2019. And so that's just from Wikipedia. And then right there within Wikipedia, you just want to laugh. Since becoming prime minister of Palestine in 2019, listen to this. Guess what he's done? The prime minister of Palestine, supposedly, he has pursued peace negotiations between Hamas, which de facto controls the Gaza Strip, which is part of Palestine, and the Palestinian central government in the West Bank. So wait a second. He's the prime minister of, quote, Palestine. What does he do with all his time? He tries to promote peace between warring factions within Palestine because Palestine doesn't exist. I hope that is just like whacked out. So the prime minister of Palestine isn't even in control of Palestine. He's trying to bring together the people that are controlling Gaza in Palestine and the West Bank in Palestine, because nobody's in control, because Palestine is not a country, because Palestine is not a distinct people group. Palestine is a concept. Palestine is a lie. Palestine is a propaganda effort to fool the West and make it possible for the incessant effort of the pan-Arab interest and Mohammedan Muslim false god Allah serving country interest to destroy Israel. It's just that simple. And I'm going to probably conclude with this. We talked about how Osama bin Laden's Saudi Arabian, but his justification for killing innocent Americans has something to do with the Jews, but really what it has to do with is because the Jews are oppressing Palestine, and it's not right to kill innocent people, but you can kill the people that are trying to kill, that have killed you. But the innocent Americans on 9/11 had nothing to do with any of that, but it's okay to kill them. I mean, it's confusing. But what's even more confusing is he's talking about Palestine and saying us when he's a Saudi Arabian hanging out in Pakistan and Afghanistan. But of course, the reason he says us is because to him, it's all the same. He's an Arab Muslim. He's an Arab Muslim. He's a lying Mohammedan. He serves a false god Allah. Of course, now he's burning in hell. It's again, it's like me being a Tennessean trying to plead the case for something that's happened in South Carolina, or maybe Louisiana or Mississippi or some other state. It's very, very similar to that. And then we saw that this Ahmad Shakur, the head of the first PLO organization, was an ambassador for Syria to the UN and Saudi Arabia to the UN, I think Jordan also, but then he was the head of, and the reason he can do that is because Palestine's not a country. They're just arguing a point that they have created. I'm going to play about 30 seconds of the Prime Minister of Palestine, and then we're going to talk about it, and I think we're going to wrap up here.
Hamas is not going to be finished. If Israel thinks that they're going to finish Hamas, I think that's a miscalculation on their side. It's not going to happen. Hamas is an integral part of the Palestinian political arena. Whether the certain capitals consider Hamas as a terrorist organization or not, that's something to do with them. But Hamas is an integral part of the Palestinian political arena. We have been in dialogue with Hamas. And as I said, Israel will not finish Hamas. The Hamas leadership is in Qatar, in certain parts of the world.
Okay, I want to play that last little bit. We didn't even touch on this yet.
Israel will not finish Hamas. The Hamas leadership is in Qatar, in certain parts of the world.
Okay, I want to unpack that a little bit, and I'm going to try to bring this in for a landing. So that's the supposed prime minister of the country that doesn't exist, which would be the home of a people group that doesn't exist, Palestine. And he's sitting down with that person from Al Jazeera. And that person from Al Jazeera says, what's going to happen to Hamas? Now, the man speaking is a liar. He's a coward. He's a deceiver. He's a Mohammedan. So it's okay if you're a Mohammedan, you can lie if it serves your purpose. It's right out of the Quran. So he's, kudos to him. He's being a good Mohammedan, and he's serving his false god Allah very, 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 very effectively at this point. If he was a leader, if he was a human being, he would be working right now to get rid of Hamas because they're demons, because they're evil. That's what he would be doing. If he cared about the little people, he would be exercising. He doesn't have any authority. That guy is just an elite. He's not that high up on the food chain, but he's in at least the peripherals of the rich elite in the Arab Muslim world. And so he's legitimizing Hamas. Hamas, he said, is part of the I won't use the accent thing because I butcher it. But he's basically saying Hamas is part of the political landscape and they're here to go, which means that he doesn't denounce what they did. He doesn't denounce the rapings. He doesn't denounce the beheadings. He doesn't denounce the killing of innocent civilians because they're not going anywhere. And then he said, it's difficult to hear in the accent, but he says, perhaps there are some capitalists that would refer to them as a terrorist organization. Well, being a good Mohammedan, serving a false god Allah, where it's okay to lie to you, if it suits your purpose. He says capitalists can say terrorism, that's for somebody else. He's such a liar and such a deceiver. I didn't even bring up the slides. Do you know that the top 2 or 3 leaders of Hamas, between all of them, are worth like $11 billion. $11 billion. How much of their $11 billion have they used for the Palestinian people? Zero. Well, they have bought some AK-47s and RPGs and other explosives. They have paid for some tunnels underground. I guess they bought some paragliders, but they're liars. They're deceivers. They do not care about the people that they're calling the Palestinian people, or they would build schools. They would build hospitals. They would create industry. No, the Palestinians are pawns in the hands of those that are perpetrating. Even Rashida Tlaib lives pretty good. And yet we are sending our tax dollars that get usurped and corruptly are turned into munitions and used by Hamas, when the very people leading this are worth billions and don't care that people are starving. In fact, they want a return on their investment. These billionaires in Qatar, we'll get to that in a minute, but these billionaires in Qatar want a return on their investment. And so they're picking up the phone. And when Israel is saying to the civilians in Gaza, you need to leave for your safety, you've got billionaires in Qatar that are getting on the phone with their demonic princes in Gaza saying, if they try to leave, shoot them. That's what's happening. And at the very end of that clip, this lying Mohammedan, this demonic prince, this guy who's on at least the periphery of the rich elite that doesn't care about ordinary people, what does he say? He says, we have leaders in Qatar and other places. What he is saying is, if I had the guts, if I had the testicles, I'd be right in there with the Hamas. But I want to play the pretty boy role of a diplomat, and I want to use my deceptive Mohammedan skills on the Western world. But when I'm asked directly, I can't denounce Hamas because I like Hamas. I'm proud of Hamas. And I want to signal to the world and signal to the brethren out there that are listening that there's plenty of money. And whatever happens to Hamas in the immediacy of this conflict, there will be another tranche of money that'll show up to some other wacko. And so basically he's saying the evil and the violence against Israel will never stop as long as he has anything to say about it. And as long as the Western world is foolish enough, simplistic enough, naive enough to believe it. I'm going to close with this. I'm actually going to close. I'm very, very proud. I'm going to close. If I can find it. Yeah. This is a direct quote from a Palestine from a PLO guy. Palestinian people does not exist. The creation of a Palestinian state is only a means for continuing our struggle against the state of Israel for our Arab unity. In reality, there is no difference between Jordanians, Palestinians, Syrians, and Lebanese. Only for political and tactical reasons do we speak today about the existence of a Palestinian people. All right, I've got it out there. There ain't no such thing as Palestine, y'all. Till next time, God bless you. God bless your family. God bless the state of Ohio. And God bless the United States of America. Good night, y'all.
I hear the sweet sound of freedom, and I won't be long.